So finally we meet.
That's
Sort of.
right. Yeah, this is in the modern world, this is meeting.
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you right at the outset, I love your book. Your most recent.
Really?
Oh, yeah, I do. And for reasons we'll get into. But I think we need to have you. Oh, first of all, your last name, Jovin, is that how it's pronounced?
Yes, it's just
Okay,
the
just the way it looks.
plain boring thing, no French or Italian or anything. Just
I don't
that's
know why
very
I
well
asked. I'm
done.
just going to call you Ellen throughout the whole conversation. All right.
Are you gonna just so I know what's gonna happen here? Are you going to edit this down, or do I need to sound intelligent in the first round?
Oh, no. Excuse me. I'll edit that, maybe. Maybe. I doubt it. No, I like
Okay.
these I really, it's why I call it conversations.buzz. I just want real conversations. I don't want,
Okay.
unfortunately, most of the people that I talk to, and I think you will be the big exception so far, is most of the people I talk to are used to being interviewed. So they expect, question, answer, and it's like, okay. So
in case you haven't already gleaned this from the book, I like to talk.
yes,
So
I get it.
that won't be a problem.
Well, that's good. Anyway, to answer your question about editing, probably I'll just what I will do is I will start with something from the conversation that's a real hook to put at the very beginning, and there'll be a little music or something, and then we start talking.
Okay.
And
I hope it's going to be like something lively, like disco or something.
what? Well, we'll put down the request list. All right.
Because this is meant to be this whole thing is meant to be a grammar party.
I've never heard that term before. Grammar party. It's perfect.
I have a lot more where that came from.
All right. Explain who you are and what you do. I think it'll be easier to have you do that.
Okay, I'm happy to do that. My name is Ellen Jovin, and I am a lifelong language obsessed person. 4 years ago, I decided it would be a good idea to have a actually not traveling yet. I decided it would be a good idea to have a pop-up grammar advice stand. So I bought a folding table, made a sign, walked outside my building, put the table down, and started answering grammar questions from passersby.
You know what that reminds me of? It sounds like Lucy in the old Peanuts cartoons. The psychiatrist is in, or the doctor is in, or whatever that said. But you're not even charging the nickel.
I know, I'm cheaper. And it's funny because, I didn't think of that when I started doing it, but people started pointing that out.
Yeah.
And I was intrigued because I guess you don't know what's at work on your subconscious, when these things are happening. I read a huge amount of Peanuts when I was a kid, and I read those books over and over and over and over again. So it's completely in my upbringing. So maybe that was at work up there.
So you live in New York City, and so that's where you started setting up your table somewhere.
Yes, and I live right by an express subway stop, which is extremely convenient for obtaining grammar traffic. But I grew up in Los Angeles, so I grew up in California, and I've lived here for most of my adult life.
Oh, okay. So you decided to start answering people's grammar questions. Why?
It just seemed like a logical thing to do. I always have loved language and grammar. My professional life is built around those things. I've either taught writing and grammar or written professionally throughout my adult life. And I studied in school. I studied German. My undergraduate degree is in German. My graduate degree is an MA in comparative literature. So I've studied a ton of languages besides the ones I did in school, 25 plus to be exact.
25.
Because, if you're looking for grammar, why constrain yourself to English? There are so many other languages. So
because English is a lifelong study unto itself.
Well, I enjoy right as I'm speaking to you right now, I have behind me rows and rows of grammar books.
Yeah.
You're able, in the view that you have right now, which others won't have, but in this view, this is a partial view of my language library, which is alphabetized from Albanian to Zulu. I just really love language books, language materials. So I started doing that as a hobby in my 40s, with the internet. Oh, I'm going back to your original question. So um, in 2009, I discovered social media for the first time. I'd been resistant, but then when I found it, I also found online language groups. For example, on Facebook, they have all these groups for language learners. So I joined dozens and dozens of them. I was in a giant group called Polyglots for people who study languages as hobbies, and I got really, really into it. And so I'd be online talking to people about genitive case or like all kinds of grammatical features of other languages. But the years went by, and I don't know if you've experienced this yourself, Dave, but I got crabby being online. It's not, we're not as physical beings. We're not meant to
Yeah.
spend this much time on computers. So
Yeah.
I just decided in 2018, I just thought, hey, I'll transfer some of my online grammar nerding out onto the street. That's what happened.
That's what your book is mostly about. I'm about halfway through it.
I'm not going to give you a quiz unless you want one.
I will fail. Let me explain. Let me explain something about me, which is, I think, weird, but you may find that you're going to say, I'm thinking you might say, oh yeah, there's a lot of people like you. I've been in radio for 53 years. So I've been talking for a living since I was a teenager. And I also write, but when I was in school, I I was I was a terrible English student in that I could write and read very, very well from the outset. I think it's because I read an awful lot when I was a child, but by the time I was in high school, I was a good writer. But I could, this grammar stuff, the names of the parts of language, and you know, and people diagramming sentences. One time I actually got myself in trouble. I was a sophomore year in high school, and poor Miss Hart was diagramming sentences on the board, and popped up in the middle of the class and said, "Miss Hart, why don't you teach us how to put a sentence together rather than take them apart?" And she was not amused. But the upshot was that all the way through school in my English classes, I would get A's for my compositions and assignments for writing, but I would get C's and D's in the actual grammar quizzes. And as a result, had a little bit of trouble planning this conversation with you because I wanted to give myself a list of questions if I want to come to something and don't forget something. But honest to goodness, I started reading your book and so forth. And I don't want to give the wrong impression of the book because it's not stuffy at all. It's very entertaining and very lively. But I run across these parts of speech that I'd forgotten exist. I've forgotten the names of them. I still have no idea what they mean. I can't tell you a dangling participle from a pluperfect subjunctive or whatever it is, subjunctive. So it's a very confusing thing for me. And I know that you run into, it seems to me that the people that come up and ask you questions have a pretty good sense of what it is they want to get at. And I couldn't do that.
Well, you just raised so many topics and questions and ideas for me. Let me try to be orderly
Well, you should
about
interrupt so I don't do that.
this. No, I can handle it. I do definitely meet people like you. But I think, we're all different. Every one of us has different strengths and skills, and it's absolutely the case that it's possible to be an excellent writer without really connecting you just described it, without connecting with the grammatical approach to things. Now, I used to be, and when I was in school, I was actually a mathlete. I always loved language and writing, but I was a very math and science like friendly student. That was probably more of my focus, and I anticipated that would be more where I'd end up. So it makes sense to me with the way my brain operates that I would like the grammar stuff. And it was actually my 8th grade diagramming class with Barbara Beebe And I'm still in touch with her today, naturally, and with my 3rd and 5th grade English teacher, Laura Bickle. Um, so her diagramming class just absolutely set my brain on fire. I'd already loved grammar, and in my elementary school, we started studying Spanish in 4th grade. So I was also already thinking about it, in a different language. I spoke German as a very small child because my family lived in Germany and I went to a German kindergarten. Maybe that affected me also in some way that I am no longer capable of remembering. But I happen to like thinking about these things very analytically. But my motto, this isn't my only motto, I have a lot of mottos, is 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 literature first, grammar second. So if I had just studied grammar in isolation, forget, that's not really a way to connect to language, the
Right.
thing that binds us together as human beings. It's the reading that dominated everything else, I think, the reading and the writing. And then for me, on top of that, I happen to like to pull apart the sentences in a way that didn't appeal to you. That doesn't mean anything, though. We might just have different learning approaches. So I don't consider myself at all an expert in the mysteries of what engages children, which is the key. That's kind of what we're talking about here. Like, writing is a very important skill, being able to communicate well, very important. How do you connect children to that when they're young, and ignite their interest? So for you, that part was a failure. Maybe for other students in your class, it helped them. I know that when I write, I do think I am thinking very technically about why a given sentence doesn't work. And
Mhm.
so, it might be, oh, the opening dependent clause has too many modifiers and it goes on too long, and then the independent clause after that isn't exciting and dynamic enough. So I am thinking that way, but you can do that in a more intuitive way and still get the same outcome.
My big thing right now, as right now, always has been, I guess, is, and I have a terrible time communicating with people. My own wife, we've been married for 34 years, and she says things where I have a sense of what it is she's trying to say, but I don't get it because she's not real clear about defining what, you know what I'm saying? It's like the definitions of words to me become a problem because I expect people to be saying exactly what they mean, and they almost never are. So I have a lot of trouble understanding what people are trying to say, and they always end up something like looking at me crazy, like it's like, well, you know what I meant. And I said,
This
no,
sounds like it
I didn't know.
this sounds like it might be something beyond grammar, though.
Well, it's not just her. It's not just her. All I'm striving for is clarity and simplicity, and not trying to show off with the words that I use. And,
I think that intersects closely with my own style. So we may have come at this from different directions in some ways,
yeah,
but in the end, what I care about, I don't think it matters whether people know they can define a verb or remember subjunctive. I think it is important for professional success and also a lot of different types of personal rewards that we may not think about. I think it's valuable to have control of these elements, but you can have control of them without naming them. I mean, language didn't originate with people saying, okay, guys, now we need a noun. We need more nouns. Let's make a pile of verbs over here by the fire. Like it happened, it happened intuitively and organically.
yeah.
So plenty of writers tell me that too. People who write for a living who are beautiful writers. And I notice people feel embarrassed that they can't remember what a clause is.
Yeah.
But I truly, if you can still do the things that you need to do without that, who cares?
There you go. That's what I love about your book, because by the book, by the way, is Rebel without with a clause. With a clause.
Yes, and my new joke about that, which I think is not very obvious, and so maybe I'm gonna have to drop it, is that if I were a rebel without a clause, it would have been a very short book.
Oh yeah. Good point. All right. Well, when we first started exchanging emails, I said, I'm just dying to get at this Oxford comma thing, because for some reason it keeps popping up everywhere I look. People send me emails, and my own son and I've been talking about uh, Oxford commas. Can you explain what an Oxford comma is for those who are not aware, and why there's a controversy about it and how you feel about it?
Sure. Depending on when and where you went to school, you might have learned it under a different name, first of all. So it has some aliases. It's the Oxford comma or the serial comma, not like a cereal box, but SERIAL. And then it's also sometimes known as a series comma, but I don't encounter that much in the US.
Mhm.
And it is the comma before the and. When you have a list, it's the comma before the and that precedes the last item. So, for example, I ate peaches, comma, grapes, and what else? And toast for breakfast.
Okay.
Peaches, grapes. That is a weird breakfast. That's not what I have for breakfast. But so in that case, I have a cluster of items: peaches, grapes, and toast. Some people put the comma before the and, which is called the Oxford comma. Some people don't. And often the people who are very attached to it get grumpy if you
Yes.
remove it from their writing. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
So do
Yeah.
you use it?
I use it when I think it's absolutely necessary for clarity.
So
So
that
that it,
sounds, yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry,
well, I
Dave.
was going to say, I mean, I can't give you a proper example, but it's the kind of thing that you read once in a while because everybody thinks it's a very funny sentence to say, uh, "Let's eat grandma," or "Let's eat, comma, grandma." It's that kind of difference. And if that occurs in a series, then I will use it. But otherwise, my problem with this, I when I read, or when I write, I should say, I want the sentence to be not only communicate clearly and have a sense of uh,
Rhythm?
feeling to. Pardon me. Yeah,
Oh,
rhythm. The rhythm is important, and the emotion that it's imparting. Writing between the lines and so forth. I want it to be visually as clean as possible. I don't like to write a sentence and see I've got 4 commas in here. It looks to me like this should be 2 sentences, not one. And that's my problem with the Oxford comma. But I'll be darned if now that on the computer, I use Grammarly, which pops up and kind of corrects you, helps you along once in a while, because I'll make a typo. More than anything, it's just I'll make a typo and that'll help me out. But that darn thing insists on the Oxford comma, and it
does
annoys.
it really?
Yeah, it annoys me to no end. I have to.
That actually surprises me a little bit, but I haven't tested it. I was actually trying to get myself invited over to Grammarly's headquarters yesterday because I feel a moral obligation to know more about the tool, and it's also interesting to know how these products are developed and the kind of work that goes behind them. I never use grammar checkers. I always turn them off if I can find them. Sometimes
Mhm.
they're a little elusive, so I had to have a little tech support last week to get rid of one that was annoying me. It
Yeah.
objected to my spelling of YOUR, or I can't remember whether it wanted me to put YOU apostrophe RE. Yeah, I think that's what it wanted me to do. And I had YOUR.
They're
And I
distinctively different words.
yeah, and I was I mean, I was right. It wasn't like I was, but it didn't recognize in my sentence. I guess it was predicting that it was more likely that I would want the other,
Yeah.
but I don't like being bossed around in
Right.
grammar, so I
No, nor
I'm
should you. No, I think I find the same problem. It's like somebody sitting here going, "Oh, wait a minute, wait, look at it." Uh, but I do like to see that I've misspelled something because I hit a wrong key.
absolutely, and I think for me, that is a useful tool for Grammarly too. Like if you have your brain fully turned on and you're exerting your own will on the document, it may be helpful to you. Like just don't auto accept everything. It may be helpful to point out something that you may have a typo that created a grammatical problem, and it will help you find it quickly. But especially if you are an original writer, if you're doing things that are kind of creative and then maybe don't kind of fit with the standard sentence in some unexpected way. Like the one, I mean, I'm not saying my sentence with the your was creative, but something about the structure was unusual to Grammarly. If you do a lot of that kind of stuff, you're going to get marked all the time, and it's just going to get in the way of your, who wants to see red lines under what they've written? I hate looking at
I've
red lines.
I've written plays that have been produced. One of them was produced at a professional theater in Romania, and I went there for the opening of the play. And I'll tell you something: when you write dialogue,
Oh yeah.
Grammarly will drive you out of your mind. So
Yes.
I've got a piece of software that doesn't have that, or you can turn that kind of thing off. Otherwise, it's correcting the fact that you're writing like a real person, not like the rules.
Are
Why
you
do we
talking
have
about
rules?
script writing software?
Pardon me? Yeah.
Talking about, yeah. You asked me a question that I haven't answered yet, so I just want to make sure I hang on to this.
Okay.
My position on the Oxford comma is that I don't really care because it's way less important than people think it is. But in cases where it's needed for clarity, even if you're following Associated Press style, a lot of people think you're just not supposed to put it in. That is not the case. You are supposed to put it in according even to Associated Press style, which normally says leave it out if you have a clarity problem. And here's a clarity problem, or at least a readability problem. I ordered salad, comma, spaghetti and meatballs and soda. So I have spaghetti and meatballs and soda. I have an and in the second item. And so that one screams for a comma after meatballs. I ordered salad, comma, spaghetti and meatballs, comma, and soda. It's not inconsistent. I think people get so obsessed with consistency that
Yeah.
they feel like they're violating some sort of grammar law if they say, oh, well, I don't normally put it, but I'm going to put it here. No, you are helping the reader. It's about audience. You're
Well,
audience sensitive.
I think the reason people feel that way is because we call them rules. We call them grammar rules. And, and we ask each other, is it correct to do this?
Yeah.
And you're right. There are exceptions to pretty much all rules. And if you're
Go
the
ahead.
if you're the one that's wielding the language, it ought to fit your intent at the moment.
I think that the role of memory is very important in this piece of the discussion because people, people who can't remember what they had for lunch yesterday think they remember exactly what they were taught when they were 11, and it's just not the case. I mean, it's true that sometimes things are taught, um, occasionally things are taught incorrectly, and sometimes thinking about a particular language issue changes, as our access to large language databases has increased, our understanding of actual usage has improved. We're not just basing it on what one person says based on what they've read in literature and what they think. It's more like you can look at large bodies of literature and see how people who are excellent writers are actually using language. So it's stretched our imagination of what is acceptable, I think. But in addition, young kids tend to remember prohibitions. Things that you're not allowed to do
Right.
and get in trouble for really stick. But I've noticed that people often forget the qualifications to the principle. So I work with so many adults who truly believe you cannot begin a sentence with because. That is just not factual. That is not true.
Or but.
Right. I mean, maybe their teachers taught them. Yeah, and that's the but and thing is a separate issue that has I think that's different considerations. Those are different considerations, but also interesting. But the because thing, so kids write fragments when they're not monitored, because we speak in fragments. So kids will write because I want to, or something, they might be
Yeah.
writing a little short story in third grade because
Yeah.
I want to, period. And then the teacher doesn't want them to write fragments. So maybe the teacher says, don't begin with because as a temporary thing, or maybe when they're but they can begin with because if they have, because I was tired, I decided to take a nap. That's a perfectly legitimate sentence. It's identical structurally to when I am tired, I take a nap, dependent clause, independent clause. But, maybe the seventh grade teacher explained that, when the kid was a little older, but the adult doesn't remember that. They forget the part about you can do it as long as you have another independent clause, if what could be a full sentence after that opening part. And so it's very hobbling, and that's what causes people to do things like, due to the fact that I was late today, as opposed to just saying because I was late today and then
Yeah.
something, something, something.
Yeah.
So I want people to talk like human beings and to feel comfortable doing that, not to feel constrained.
I think that's like, certainly it's true in my business. And I think probably in many, many businesses, when you first start out, you have to learn how to do it the so-called correct way. And I'm using the air quotes, how to do it properly. And then over time, as you become more experienced in your field, you learn how to forget about some of those rules, to set them aside and do it in a way that's more effective for you.
I think that is a beautiful way to put it, and that ties in with what you just brought up a moment ago. The beginning, I forget which conjunction you use, but beginning sentences with and but, that's also a prohibition that a lot of kids are taught in school. And I actually think that has some instructional benefit because so many of us, even as adults, speak in sentences that begin with conjunctions. It's useful to teach children to begin with the more of the meat and potatoes of the sentence, and then as they grow older, they'll notice, if they're reading carefully, that journalists regularly begin with and but. Writers of beautiful novels begin with and but. I think you can do it badly or you can do it well. You know, you have to have a sense of the rhythm and the style, and whether it's having the effect you want. Overdoing it can sound kind of amateurish, I think, but it's a writing maturity thing that you develop, as you said. You know, you end up becoming more knowledgeable about your field and you get comfortable.
Well, and also when you're writing, and very much the same as when you're speaking, but when you're writing in a particular voice. Most of the time, it's your own voice, but not
Yes,
always. And
right.
if you're trying to, to give a certain character to the information or what you're trying to say, you will do that in a stylistic way that may be different from the way you would normally speak. But this is part of the growth of your particular skill, right?
Yeah.
Because of your experience.
I love the way you put that. And I also think, um, I remember when I was in my 20s, I wondered why there were so many math geniuses and so few, by comparison, writing prodigies. I think I'm sure people can speak. There are people who can speak more knowledgeably and eloquently about this than I can. But I think so much with writing, and communicating generally, that it, it requires maturity. So much of it is being aware of how people might differ from you and how you can speak to them in a way that will engage them and not put them off. And you just usually, you can be a whiz with numbers. Y- it doesn't require the human skills that people, in the same way that communicating through language requires. I've looked back at some of my college writing, and I'm thinking, okay, I think I thought I was a lot better than I was at that age. It's really, that's the other thing. When people say, "Oh, everyone writes like hell today," it's young kids don't know how to write. Take If you have an attic with some old papers, take a look at what you used to do. And I think people would be surprised. I was even I already knew that, and I was surprised when I looked at some stuff last year. I thought, wow, I was annoying.
Let's go back to grammar and your grammar table a little bit. Tell us about some of the great conversations you've had, some of the ones that are most memorable to you for whatever reason, and the ones you like to tell.
Sure. Oh my gosh, there's so many. I mean, every single time I go out, I get happy. I'm happier when I leave than when I set up. It just, you never know what's going to happen. One of my favorite stories involved the footnote fetishist that I met um, outside my apartment building. That may not be a category that people are automatically familiar with, the footnote fetishist, but I was talking grammar with some people, and a woman was standing by waiting. She came over to me after they left, and she told me that she loved what I was doing, and she was a huge footnote fan. She just loved footnotes. So she told me that she had tattooed a footnote on her foot. And it was winter, so she had, boots on or something. But she pulled out her phone and she showed me this footnote that she had tattooed on her foot. It said seven and then an ibid. So it was like a classical brief footnote. And that's the thing that astonishes me. It's not, so there's grammar, but then there are also the grammar adjacent things, word lovers that will come over and tell me the funniest things. There's the woman who, um, a bunch of people can still recite prepositions in alphabetical order. You know, they learned this thing in school where they had to memorize lists of prepositions. So they start with the A's, about, above. I mean, I can't do it because I wasn't actually asked to memorize these. I just know them by function.
Mhm.
But they can keep going. I mean, some of them know preposition song. I met a woman who had choreographed a dance to this prep song about prepositions when she was in 5th grade, and she performed a little piece of it for me. She still remembered. She was around 40. So some of this is nostalgic for people. Let's see, what else? What would be interesting? I like family and husband wife disputes. It's hilarious. As I mentioned in the book, and I don't know whether you've gotten there yet, but when we're talking about a husband and wife dispute, I found that the wife is almost always right.
Really? Well, that's certainly been my experience.
One of the early encounters I had involved a husband, wife, and an apostrophe. The um, the wife wanted to know. So the husband had texted the wife about using the plural of their last name in an email, like something. It said something like, "Another fun night out for the Smiths." That wasn't their last name. I don't remember what it was right now. But so he had done another fun night out for the Smith, or another great night out for the Smith apostrophe S. So he made their last name
That's
plural by putting apostrophe S instead of just an S. So she wanted to know if that was right because she thought it was wrong what her husband had sent her, and she was right that it was wrong.
yeah.
And so then then but it's not like I don't sit there and say, "Oh, that's really bad that you did that." That's not the vibe. It's meant to be fun and lively. He laughed, she laughed, they went off and did whatever they were going to do. So that's how it goes. That's how I roll.
Yeah, we see that kind of thing a lot. And I know a lot of people that will point those out, it's apostrophe. Oh, somebody wrote apostrophe. They're always putting an apostrophe before any word that ends with S gets an apostrophe, right? And and that just indicates that you understand that and you know what the person was trying to say, and let's, cut them a little bit of slack because you're not a big fan of helping people by correcting them, right?
No, I answer the question that's asked. So if someone comes up to me and wants to know what a noun is, I'm going to talk about that. If someone wants to know, when I was in Ohio, at least twice I got asked if ain't was a word.
Yes.
And I found that interesting because I've hardly ever been asked that anywhere else. And I think two of maybe, a handful of times we're in Ohio. So I don't know whether that means anything. That was a very small sample size. Nonetheless, it struck me. And, my answer to that is, of course, ain't is a word.
Yes.
If people are saying something and it has meaning,
It's a
it's a
word.
word.
Yeah.
I don't, but what does that mean? That I don't write it in my corporate email, when I'm
Right.
writing to my clients, I don't use it. But the ain't has its own system that it fits into a dialect in a perfectly logical way. So if I'm hearing ain't at the grammar table, I'm not thinking that's wrong. I'm thinking that the person is speaking in a dialect that I understand in a way that I actually enjoy because um, it's miraculous how many different little pockets of language you have all over the United States where
Oh yeah.
people speak differently. Oh, I love talking about this. This is grammar adjacent too. It's not specifically grammar, but just pronunciation is so much fun. Like my husband and I have pronunciation differences. He grew up in Connecticut. I grew up in California. I seem to have been left with fewer vowels than he has. So sometimes he doesn't know what I'm saying. For example, the names Don and Dawn.
Uh-huh.
For me, those sound the same. Don and Don. And do they for you? Where did you grow up?
Well, I grew up in California also.
So
And
you probably say them the same, right?
well, yes and no.
Okay.
Here's the problem because I speak for a living, I tend to shouldn't say that because I don't always do it. Sometimes I do it intentionally, but I would hear the W in it. I would say dawn Not dawn. I'm exaggerating now,
Right,
but
I
it
understand.
would sound different to me, I think, depending on
But do
who's
you
pronouncing.
but before you did that, when you were first entering the workplace, did you actually say them the same? Do you know?
Yeah, yeah, I'm sure I would have. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and so when I refer, I have friends who are named DAWN, and when I refer to them, my husband thinks I'm referring to a guy named DON. So it's actually, I find that really, I find that a lot of fun. Or I also got asked about um, at the end of sentences. That was in,
Oh
where was
yes.
that? South Carolina, and you hear that more in certain dialects in certain parts of the country than others. Like I can't say, I don't personally say, "Where's he at?" You
Hmm.
know, I don't say that. I just say, "Where is he?" But "Where is he at?" doesn't. I think it sounds kind of charming, so I got a kick out of it. So people ask me about that kind of thing, and then one person is on the left, hoping that I'm going to diss the person on the right for doing it. Um, but I don't. Again, I think we can have a kind of bilingualism where we have more traditional grammar that's associated with standard American English, and we can have fun with the other stuff. So bring it. That's my
That's a
idea.
that is a great outlook. That's a great philosophy, and I'm so glad to talk to you because it's going to make it so much easier for me to, to not catch those things. I never point them out, but except for my wife, because she wants me to help. She wants me to help, and I wouldn't do that to her with other people around. It's just when there's just the two of us, I'll say, no, what you mean is this. But there are a lot of things, and I hear this professionally, and a lot of people, and it just drives me up the wall. And they say, well, the reason why is the reason
Oh,
why.
so you want the reason that, or you want
The reason is
happen because. Yeah.
brevity, clarity.
Oh, the reason. Well, okay. So you're not, yeah. And the complaint I hear about that one is the duplication. So the reason already takes care of
Right.
the why takes care of the reason.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't do that in writing, but I did notice the other day, because I think about these kinds of things rather often. I
Yeah.
noticed that I said it. I said the reason why at the probably at the grammar table. So maybe I'll be fired. I don't know. But stuff like that pops up. And the thing is, often the people who come up to me who are most aggressive with complaints. And I have to say, the more aggressive complaints are almost always through angry emails and not at the grammar table, which I think helps show that
Yeah.
face-to-face communication is good for calm and communication and kindness. It just, people behave better when they have a face staring at them.
Right.
But now what was my I totally lost my train of thought. What was I just saying right
We were
before
talking
that?
about the reason why,
Oh,
wherever that
right.
took you.
Oh, right. And so the point is, people who complain really angrily about some feature of language that they find illogical, they don't realize, their attention has been drawn to that because they see a departure from their own habit or from something they were taught. If you look closely at all kinds of fixed expressions we use, they're not necessarily logical. We don't say, when we ride on a train, are we sitting on top of the car? You know, we're not. Usually that would be really scary. We're
Yeah.
inside in a comfortable seat. So, some things get more scrutiny and then they see, I don't know. I think there's a lot more wonder and surprise in language than people realize when they get too fixated on what they think are absolute rules.
I feel like I'm in a counseling session. This is great.
I'm going to charge you 5 cents now.
You're helping you're helping to calm me down about things. Now here's a real challenge, because this is the best example I can think of my real hot button. Is there is so much redefining of the language going on now. And I suppose the language has always evolved and words have been redefined. But when I saw the Oxford English Dictionary a couple, 3, 5, 10 years ago, whatever it was, when they decided that literally means the same thing as figuratively, I have no use for the Oxford English Dictionary. Did you, were you saw that? Did you see that? There was
Yes,
actually
and
a big article
yes,
about it.
I I don't believe that I personally say I literally here. Oh, just a cautionary note.
Yeah.
People tell me what they say or don't say, but I can sometimes catch them 2 seconds later contradicting what they just told me. So our sense of what comes out of our mouths is not always perfect.
Right.
I don't believe that I personally use literally, to mean, yeah, I know what you're talking about. Wait, let me think of a good example.
It was
So,
literally raining cats and dogs or something like that.
right, that kind of thing. So I don't do that. I mean, I kind of understand the argument, but I don't personally feel a need to I don't feel a need for that one. So I'm not going to argue about it. I'm not going to argue in favor of it particularly. However, I do say things that are hyperbolic and not literally true all the time.
Yeah.
My head exploded.
Yeah.
My head didn't explode. And I think that's sort of the idea behind it, that the literally is a bit. I haven't looked at the formal explanations lately, but that it's a sort of exaggeration for dramatic effect. But yeah,
Well,
I don't miss that one. I'm not
that's
going to
another
fight on behalf of that one.
hyperbole is another problem. We got to a point where we used to have movie stars. Now everybody's a superstar. I don't know what's bigger than that. You used to be able to go up to a fast food place and order a small, medium, or large Coke. Now there's no such thing as small. There's no such thing as medium. You've got regular, you've got large, you've got super gigantic, and everything. We've gotten everything to the point where there's no place else to go, and that kind of thing. So now we're talking about words and not grammar per se,
But that's the thing. I all of this stuff's I find sometimes that people who are language professionals of various varieties get a little bit annoyed by the sprawl. I guess you could say I have grammar sprawl at the grammar table, because I really am open to talk. I don't feel a need to box people into just grammar. So I'm sorry, that's not a grammar table. You are going to have to go find a vocabulary table somewhere else. That's not going to happen. And really, grammar itself, the term is used in a variety of different ways. I mean, it's often used to refer to more just the actual structural relationships that you have in a language, but it's also used more popularly to talk about correctness and incorrectness, or anything that people think might fall into something that the category of something that could be criticized by something else in their speech or writing. So pronunciation gets tossed in there, everything. That's why I go out very prepared. I'm not just going out with a table and a chair. I'm going out with a table and piles of books that I actually had to acquire a grammar table cart to carry because they were getting too heavy. So that if someone wants to know a word history, I can look it up in Merriam-Webster for them. That's not grammar. That's, word history. But and then sometimes here's what happens, which I find amazing. Sometimes people stand far away from the table and look at it, and it will look as though they want to come over and talk to me. And I'll finally say something, and they'll say something like, "Well, I have a question, but I'm not sure it's grammar." So there's this fear of bringing, and it often has to do with punctuation. So
Yeah.
people argue that punctuation isn't grammar, but my feeling about that is we punctuate a lot based on the grammatical structures that are in the sentence. So they are markers, they're indicators of meaning. They're not just where we take a pause to breathe. So that's all part of what I cover. And in fact, a lot of the questions I get are punctuation related.
Do you find that there has been a decline in the quality of speaking or writing, especially with the advent of social media and things like Twitter and people, or texting, where people are using one letter instead of a full word, or the thing that kills me about texting, when it first came out and my son was texting somebody and I figured out what he was doing. I said, "Oh, I see. You're telling your friend something you want to tell them, but you don't want to hear the response. Otherwise, you could
Wait, what
actually
do you
talk on the
mean?
phone." Huh?
Oh, okay, I get it.
So, are we getting to a point where communication is all going one way, and you know, there's no real concern for whether or not what I'm saying is being understood? I don't know if I'm making myself clear
No,
now.
I understand exactly. I think I understand exactly what you're asking about. Um, People have been complaining about a decline in standards for, forever. Like
Right.
I see, I've seen articles, early 20th century magazines complaining about the terrible grammar of young people. So those young people from that period are maybe the parents of the grandparents who complained about our usage.
Right.
It's like the cycle of life. I mentioned earlier that people often are deceived about the quality of the writing they produced when they were younger. So I think views on that are distorted by subjective impressions that just aren't true. So people think they wrote better than they did when they were young, so then it's more likely that they'll have a sense of decline. They don't realize how they improved through their life, what they learned about communicating to others. In addition, we don't have that much exposure. I mean, we think we have a lot of exposure, but really we're in our own community pockets. Even if that pocket is expanded by social media, you're seeing a portion of the world. You're seeing a genre. You're not, you can walk into a bookstore and read beautiful writing that's being produced all the time, every day. In addition, social media, I think for me, it actually improved my writing because it gave me an opportunity to essentially publish something for public consumption in a way that I had not been able to do before. And I learned a lot about the kinds of things that tick people off. And or that they're interested in or that they respond to. You can see what kind of engagement you get. And I've always just posted what I wanted to. I don't mean to suggest that I had like an angle of this for posting, but I think it teaches receptive people a lot about audience awareness. And yeah, I've seen young people who I think, because of this exposure, can write especially beautifully because they have access to a larger human community that responds, and they take that input and they learn more because of it. So there may be some costs from people who are not good at the kind of bilingualism that's required in a social media heavy world. Like you have, okay, fine, don't punctuate or capitalize in your texts, but you need to remember to switch when you're writing to your boss. And
Right.
some people don't do that as easily as others. But I certainly think many people are capable of that. I have a confession, and I hope you're not going to hang up on me, but
Yeah.
I send texts without capital letters and punctuation to loved ones. So
I
maybe
admire that. I admire that because I do, and I'm writing full sentences and I'm using punctuation and capitalization, and it takes me forever to respond to somebody, and and I'll get somebody will comment on that once in a while, so that's good. It's just essentially it's speaking a different version of the same language. And speaking of languages, as many as you've studied, is there something special about English? It's the only one I know, but I am absolutely head over heels in love with the English language because of all of its versatility, because I don't think we have any synonyms at all. I think every word has its own unique sense of time and feeling. It imparts an emotional difference from another word that might essentially need the same thing. And to use that, you can write between the lines by implications, by use of the word that you've chosen. And it's really like creating art to me. Are all languages like that?
I've never learned another language as well as I've learned English. So a comparison by me is probably not fair, but I believe that you can do the same kinds of things. My impression,
Hmm.
and also from what I've read, that you can do the same kinds of things across languages. There may be features that differ, but I think people make too much of those. Like,
Well, the
you know,
thing, the
I
reason what I'm actually curious about specifically, and again, I've gotten you so far away from grammar, I apologize.
you
Um,
no, but I like free associating.
okay, it's a real conversation. It's not an interview.
I'm
Um,
nonlinear.
Now, no, but the Latin languages, really, I had trouble when I was learning Spanish in school, and I actually took a French class for a while. And the referring to objects, in the male and female, I can't even remember how that's explained or why, certain objects are male and certain objects are female, and that doesn't make any sense to me. And it seems like that would be really, that would really stifle any kind of communication, and probably
No, it really doesn't. It's so automatic. I mean, when you speak a language, I'm sorry, I got excited there. I feel passionate. I have passionate feelings about this one.
good.
So yeah, um, that stuff is all automatic, and in spite of the impressions people have that you think differently because you're in one language versus the other, I think human beings, sure, we have differences, but we have so many similarities, and our biology and the feelings that spring from that and the way our brains are wired, um, astonishingly similar. So I'm not distracted at all in another language by whether I have to make it um, feminine, masculine, neuter. In German, it would be those three. I am distracted sometimes because I like to be, you know, to have grammatically correct sentences. So if I don't remember the gender of the noun in
Uh,
German, that bothers me. I don't like to get it wrong. But overall, those just become almost like wallpaper. You don't really think about them. So we have things other languages don't have, other languages have things we don't have, and humans are humans in all of them. So I'm the same, depending on your point of view, annoying or not annoying person in any language I've ever studied. I don't really, that's immutable. And it's
uh,
just but I like the grammar stretching that it gives you, because it makes you realize that some of the things you assume about language, for example, English is typically subject verb object. So, I subject, through verb, all comes last, that's the object. But other languages aren't like that necessarily. And I feel like trying to figure out the other structures, like subject, object, verb, is very common. I think it's like a fountain of youth. It probably, this is like my the equivalent of my snake oil, like of a snake oil salesman. It will cut, if you study another language, it will cut 5 years, it will add 5 years to your life, like that kind of thing. I really think it has this rejuvenating power. It's good for the skin. There we go. No one fact checked that claim.
I had one other question I was about to ask you and then let you go, but I can't remember now what it was. Um, what else should we cover? Because we've been
Well,
talking
I,
almost
I
an
have
hour here.
something.
Yeah,
I have something.
good.
Um, it's not so much about grammar in particular, but it is about the plans of the grammar table, which I'm very excited about. My husband and I went to 47 states before COVID hit. So in January of 2020, we had gone to 47 states already, and I'd set up the grammar table in all of them. And he filmed that for a documentary that he's working on about the grammar table. But I got stuck in New York. And so I had 3 states left. Well, yesterday I went to Connecticut, which was one of my 3 missing states,
How
and
could
I
you miss
did
that?
a
It's right next door.
uh, well, the thing is, that's when something is really easy to do, you don't
Yeah.
really know that you have to do it ahead of time. I thought I could go anytime, so I left it, and then everything shut down. But so now I've done all of the 48, mainland states, and I have left um, Alaska and Hawaii, and I'm going to Alaska in less than 2 weeks. And I'm super excited.
Oh, good. Yeah, that's great. You reminded me of another book that I wanted to mention to you. So I want to mention that. You probably read it. It's called The Great Typo Hunt. Are
I
you
haven't
familiar?
read that. I haven't
No.
read that. What year? Do you know approximately when
Uh,
that was came out?
oh boy,
I
it's
confess that doesn't even sound familiar to me.
okay. Wait a second. You know what? I can find out right
Is
now.
this about is this about finding errors in everything everyone else writes?
Yeah, okay, here it is. It's called The Great Typo Hunt, Two Friends Changing the World, One one correction at a time. And I'm looking at it on Amazon right now. I can't remember when I read it, and it doesn't say here, that it leaps out at me as to when it was published. But I just loved it. And what you do reminded me of this, except that you're not correcting people, you're just helping them. But there are these two guys named Jeff Deck and Benjamin Herson, and they were friends. And for some reason, they decided to go out and fix all the signs in the country, all the public signs that are wrong. They've got misspellings or they've got punctuation problems. So they went armed with magic markers and tape and whiteout and stuff like that. And they would go into stores or mark up signs out on the highway. They actually got arrested for defacing federal property by doing corrections at a national park. And they travel all over the country doing this. And it was just wonderful. I really, really enjoyed that. But it sounded kind of like what you're doing.
I haven't been arrested yet, but
Yeah.
it could happen. You never know.
Yeah.
I have been told to move by the police before, but not often.
Yeah. Okay. I got to quit for now. I'm gonna hang up and remember all the other things that I really wanted to talk to you about, and stuff probably that was much more on topic. I feel bad about this, but I came to this conversation a little bit nervous anyway, because I don't have a great grasp of grammar. And
I think it went really well.
well, I hope so. Certainly talking to you was delightful, and I'd like to do it again at some point.
All right,
Have
I
a
would love that.